We're on the first tee now, looking down the first fairway, and there's been several significant changes to this hole over the years. One being the repositioning as a result of the relocation of Mississaugua Road, and the other was the loss of the big elm tree in 2012 that finally succumbed to the Dutch elm disease. But John, would you like to talk about the relocation of the hole first?
Well, it's hard to imagine where Mississaugua Road used to be, but if you remember the old elm tree, that elm tree was on the other side of Mississaugua Road, and the green was in the grove of trees that is well to the right of the old green and about 50 yards shorter. And really good hitters hitting from the old tees could get very close to the green.
Jane, you have a recollection of this hole?
Yes, I remember coming up some evenings, dark, and I'd see people crawling on the ground with headlamps, and they were worm pickers. Kind of interesting. And I was just thinking of the trees. It was back apparently in 1929 that they planted 200 elm, and it was in 61, elm disease, they planted 400 trees to replace the elm that had died. So we're talking trees.
I'm now standing on the second tee of the championship course. This hole at one point was a 620-yard par 6 hole with the tee somewhat where the current clubhouse is now, as the first hole in those days was a par 3. Not much has changed to this hole structurally, if you will. There was a bunker at one point that was tucked into the hill on the left-hand side up by the green. That was taken out about 20 years ago. We're on the third tee now, and back when the holes were named, this hole was called the Punch Bowl. The archives indicate that the original green was in fact in a bowl in front of the present green, which was built sometime later. John, you have a story about the mound that's about 100 yards down on the left-hand side.
Well, the story that I've heard through the years is that the mound on this hole and the mound on 16 were both part of the clearing of the original golf course, and it was all done with horses and the rest of that, and that there was a collection of big boulders and stones and all of that, and they collected them into those two mounds and then just covered them with earth, and it became part of the course.
The other thing, of course, is there was a very large grove of pine trees up on the right-hand side close to the green, and those were only taken out within the last few years.
Yeah, there were some gorgeous, beautiful old white pines that framed where the fourth tee was when it was a par 5. And it was back there basically where the turnaround is for the carts now. And of course all the bunkering on the left side of the green has been added when that change took place. Because that used to be part of your walk-off from the fourth tee.
We're now standing on the fourth tee, and this used to be a par 5 up until 2012. And many years ago, there was a pair of elm trees. John, maybe you could talk about the elms and where they were.
Well, the elm trees were basically goalposts right at the entrance to the gully, or maybe 15 to 20 yards before the gully. And they framed that gully, and that was your target. There was one on the right and one on the left, of my recollection.
And if you look down on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a big willow tree. Jane?
Yes, well, many of the elms, of course, died, and we replaced them. And in many cases, we replaced them with a willow. They grew quickly, not too expensive, and there they are.
Some of them we got for nothing. Blondie Wilson had a home on the 17th fairway, and he donated them after Hurricane Hazel. And the ones that are now at the bridge at the 7th and at the 12th, and the one out here, were all out of his backyard.
From this location, on the original 9-hole course, the players used to walk down the hill that's in front of me, cross over to what is now the Big Chief, and that became the 4th hole. We're at the back of the black tee on the 5th hole, where we can see what remains of the horse barn. The original horse barn was located near the chestnut tree that used to be in front of the 18th green, but was relocated here in 1914, as the plaque indicates. The horses were used to pull the equipment that cut the fairways. The archives indicate that the barn was here until at least 1937, as the last horse was sold that year for $125. John, what recollections do you have of this hole?
Well, I remember being here as a junior and caddying for my parents, that the barn was still here in the 50s, in the early 50s, and it was being used as soil storage. And Bill Blewett, who was the green superintendent at the time, was in charge of that. So that's how my recollection with regards to the horse barn.
Jane, you want to talk about some of the property that, if you will, adjoins our current fifth hole?
Absolutely. The property adjoining the fifth hole was owned by the Oneida Club. And Dick DeBoo had been a member of Mississaugua, and he started a club called the Oneida Club. A number of us were members there as well. It had an executive 9-hole course and a few things. But anyway, it was a great property, and it was purchased by Credit Valley. And they would have reconfigured their course then.
One thing that I do remember, down on the left-hand side, just short of the current fairway bunkers, there was a fabulous drinking fountain that had big green handle and had the most delicious cold spring water that you could possibly imagine.
A tin cup for everybody.
And a tin cup for everybody, replaced by white Dixie cups in due course.
Yes, with some salt pills occasionally. Following up with Jane's comment with regards to Dick DeBoo, Dick also had offered the property prior to Credit Valley buying it to Mississaugua, and there was a general vote of Mississaugua members, and they turned down the purchase of that property for $50,000.
We're currently standing on the new forward tee of the sixth hole. And there's several items that I'd like to discuss on this hole, including the fact that George had a hole-in-one here 25 years ago last week. So congratulations, George. I think you had another one since.
In 2004. And you were captain at the time, and you waved to me that the ball was in the hole.
Okay, originally the tee, the archives show that the tee was more behind the fifth green. Not sure when that was moved, but it likely was sometime in the 1920s, maybe 1930s. Probably one of the most noteworthy changes is the filling in of the pond. And John, do you want to discuss the pond that was here?
Well, the pond was an unusual hazard in that it was about, my recollection is about 80 to maybe 100 yards off the tee at the time. And it seemed to be the catch-all for all those psychological events that happened on a tee and caught an awful lot of golf balls until eventually an ice flood took it out. And I'm not sure when, but an ice flood took out and hooked up with the river down below here, and at that time the pond was filled in.
I think it was probably filled in about 1970, but I can't find anything in the archives that might actually confirm that. Did Gordy Brightson used to fish in that pond? I'd heard that story.
It was a pretty rotten pond.
That's fiction. Gordy used to fish in the river.
He used to fish in the river, I know, on the fourth hole as well, that's for sure.
Well, we used to fish in the river for balls too, you know, remember that, Lee?
Yes. And over on the left-hand side, I think there was an old wooden rain hut. And that's been gone for a lot of years as well.